Welcome back to the Simpleton Podcast, the greatest podcast in eternity. Welcome back, Audrey Massey.
Thank you. I think you forgot to say Pope Benedict's favorite podcast.
You can say it.
Okay.
All right. We are back on Pope Benedict's Introduction to Christianity. This is the second in the series. Today, our outline is we're going to go over two pieces of listeners' feedback from the first episode we did. Then we're going to go over two sections. And the first section is going to be three parables. We'll let you hear the three parables, think about them, and we'll talk about how we've thought about them and what points Pope Benedict was trying to make with them. And then we'll talk about belief, and we'll finally talk about, you may remember 6 months ago on this podcast, we had one of the founders of the Family Mission Experience with SALT. Well, Audrey and I took our family, did the Family Mission Experience in Belize, and we're just going to tell you what it was, just as much data as you can handle, so you kind of just know what's out there. All right. Are you ready, Audrey Massey?
Yes.
Anything you want to add?
Nope. That's it. That's the plan.
That's the plan. All right. First piece of listener feedback. A woman wrote in that she loves the Pope Benedict book. She wants to share it. She's a Protestant convert, a recent convert. She wants to share it with her Protestant friends. They tend to be very suspicious of anything written by the Pope, and she wanted to know how to get them to read this thing.
So my first thought was just, it's okay if other people don't want to read the same book that you do. And sometimes even among your good friends, there's just books that strike different people at different times. So it's just not something to worry too much about if you want to recommend something and people don't listen. But as long as you, if you read the book and you enjoy it, the good parts of it will probably come out in conversation. And then, one or two friends might end up wanting to read it. I don't know. I just wouldn't get too stressed if you can't. If you think something's a really good book and you can't convince other people, I don't know. I guess that's not my feedback. But
my sense is that, no one owns this truth, right? If you read it and you take to it and it becomes like your own and you deeply understand it, it's now yours. You're not quoting Pope Benedict. You just have what he said and you can say it yourself. And there was this great, I don't know when people will be listening to this, but Tucker Carlson and Bishop Barron did an interview, and Bishop Barron was just kind of fantastic. There was this childlikeness in him where he's just bubbling over with all this cool theological observations he just wants to share. And in this interview with Tucker, who's a political pundit person, he's and then Thomas Aquinas realized that being and good are equivalent statements. And Tucker's really? And they just have this, it's just there's kind of this, he's prayed about it enough. He's made it his own, and he loves sharing these ideas, And I think that's what this type of book is. It's digest it, learn it, and then you'll want to share it. My other sense is that with Protestants, there's a large group of Protestants who don't realize that this level of beautiful theological work even exists. It's not part of their tradition. They're much more just scripture, And I think somehow, I don't know if this is the right book, but somehow just kind of flipping a light. It's like a light switch goes on when they realize, oh, wow, you can do so much more theologically than what they're used to being exposed to, And so I don't know, anything that gets that light switch flipped, and then I think they will eagerly read it,
One other thought is that I think sometimes there's a desire to read books that are aimed at Protestants or kind of a response to Protestants. And oftentimes Pope Benedict is kind of bringing, this book is about Christianity as a whole. It's about belief as a whole. And he's bringing our attention to Catholicism in its entirety, which includes everything before the Protestant Reformation. So he's drawing directly from scripture, the early church, it's not, anyway, so I don't know if that would help convince people to read it or not, but he's a brilliant theologian, in his own right. And yeah, hopefully more people will read it.
I want to play off what you said. In a different work, Pope Benedict talks about how in pre-Vatican II, the church was stuck in what theology was just apologetics. It was we're just constantly justifying why we believe something. in order to respond to Protestantism. We were defining ourselves in opposition. And what real theology is that Aquinas did, that this book is, Pope Benedict quotes Guardini as like he believed Guardini was bringing back real theology again, is actually just use your reason, quest for God, and reach for God using your reason. You're not responding to any objection. You're actually just seeing how much closer and much more you can know about God using that kind of philosophical tool set. And, I think that's right. I think that's what you were just saying. And yeah, I think in Protestant Catholic dialogue, when we can get it on those rails where we're not justifying ourselves, but we're just inviting them to see how much more there could be, that's pretty cool. All right. The other piece of feedback, I've got a squeaky chair today. Apologize. Was we got feedback that my wife's microphone was not very good. All right. And I knew I needed to go buy a microphone, and I went down to the county building in Independence, Missouri, which is on this kind of old town square. And I was given a ticket that was going to be 40 minutes before my number was called. And I look out the window of the county building, and there's a tiny guitar shop across the street. So I walk across the street, and there's these two guys there that are like in their 60s, and they look like old rockers, right? In Kansas City, sometimes the old rocker guy is actually like a blues or jazz guy. So I'm not sure what exactly they were about, but they were definitely like big music guys, right? And I go, I need a mic, a couple mic stands, and a mic. And I don't really know anything about them. It's for a podcast. So they hook me up. Really great deal. I hope it's a great deal. We're testing out the mic right now. So give us more feedback on Audrey's mic. Do you want to say something so they can hear it? You want to sing something?
I'm going to say that it's a pet peeve of Clark's that I mumble all the time, so it might have been partly that.
I think it was some type of ringing people were upset about. But so he goes, what type of podcast? I go, Catholic podcast. He goes, I'm Catholic. And I go, oh, well, yeah, I run this ministry called A Simple House. And he goes, well, what's it about? And I go, well, it's about podcast is kind of about the ministry. It's kind of about stuff in the news that seems relevant. And my wife and I are doing a podcast on Pope Benedict's book. He goes, I just read a Pope Benedict book. I'm like, okay. And he told me what book it was. Yeah. And it just seemed like very providential that's who sold us the microphone was a man currently reading Pope Benedict, and he might be listening right now. The other thing that was kind of cool and funny about it was there's a sign on the wall in this small shop that says, there is no talking politics here or you will be asked to leave. As I was leaving, I said, I look like your sign. And he goes, that sign has served us very well. We've only had to kick out 2 people.
This is a story of a 40-minute wait turning into God giving us new microphones through this guitar shop. Because when's the last time you've ever been in any guitar shop?
Never. And I always I feel special even getting to go in there. But what's also cool is the mic stands they got us have been in a lot of live shows. They're like very well used hard rock, mic stands. And that's kind of cool too. They kind of come with that, I don't know, patina.
Or just by using them.
Right. Okay. But what I was going to say though was when Pope Benedict became Pope, I had a pretty good idea of what his works were. Not his articles, but his major books. I kind of knew what they were because I had this idea that I needed to read all of them, right? And then when he became Pope, all of a sudden, the Shrine gift store in DC started showing up with all these Pope Benedict books I'd never heard of. And I'm like, and they're all by Ignatius Press. I'm like, what is this? And I started looking at them and I'm like, it wouldn't quite say what they were. I'm like, are these really his books? Like, what is this? And what they were was his Wednesday audiences, compiled into a book. And that's what the guy at the guitar shop had read. And he had said, we're here telling you how profound this Introduction to Christianity book is. And he's like, I found the Pope Benedict book kind of basic. And he's right, because he was reading a book of Wednesday audiences, which just are not at the same level as his major works, obviously. So I really disliked that they published those and didn't just say these are Wednesday audiences. They acted like Pope Benedict out with a new book. Here you go,
Well, actually, there are going to be a lot more books coming out because he's written so much, and Word on Fire Academic has just been given the rights to translate some that have never been translated.
Do you think they're articles or do you think they're full books?
I'd be interested in any of it. I think some of it is like university lectures and different things. But
okay, that would make sense. I bet most of his books are translated because I think the guy at Ignatius Press, who was his PhD student, made sure that happened. But all right, now on to the main story. Okay, Pope Benedict starts with 3 parables. I'm going to do my best to tell you the parables, and then I'm going to let Audrey try to explain why he thought these were good stories. All right. He starts with a story that comes from Kierkegaard. And it's about a circus that comes to town, and the circus is getting ready to put on their performance, and everybody's in makeup and the clowns are ready and everybody's ready. But then something happens where a fire gets out of control and the whole town is threatened to be burned up by this fire. And the circus master turns to the clown who's ready to go on and says, "You need to go to the next town and get help." And the clown runs to the next town and is just distressed and tells everyone they have to come help. And the more he's like telling the neighboring town that the fire is consuming this town and that they need to go help, the more the town thinks this is a really great advertisement for a circus. And that the more sincere the clown gets and the more he cries, the more they think he's just such a great actor. Yeah. And that this is somehow the place of the theologian in the world. And then the second story he has is from a play. It's by Paul Claudel. I don't even want to say the name of the play, Solier de Satin. Yeah. And in this play, a Jesuit missionary brother finds himself after the boat sinks, strapped to the mast, and the mast is in the shape of the cross, and he's being tossed in the ocean. And he always wanted God to rely on God, and now he feels like God has done this to him so that he'll literally rely on God. And somehow this has to do with faith and the temptation of unbelief. Did I do a good enough job on that one, or do you want to add anything to that parable?
Go ahead and do all 3, and then we'll kind of go more detail, I think.
Okay. The third parable I'm actually going to read. It's a kind of a long paragraph, and it's from Martin Buber, who's kind of a famous Jewish theologian. An adherent of the Enlightenment, a very learned man who had heard of the rabbi of Berdichev paid a visit to him in order to argue, as was his custom, with him too, and to shatter his old-fashioned proofs of the truth of his faith. And when he entered the rabbi's room, he found him walking up and down with a book in his hand, wrapped in thought. The rabbi paid no attention to the new arrival. Suddenly he stopped, looked at him fleetingly, and said, "Perhaps it is true after all." The scholar tried in vain to collect himself. His knees trembled. So terrible was the rabbi to behold, and so terrible this simple utterance to hear. But Rabbi Levi Zizek now turned to face him and spoke quite calmly. "My son, the great scholars of the Torah with whom you've argued wasted their words on you. As you departed, you laughed at them. They were unable to lay God and his kingdom on the table before you, and nor can I. But think, my son, perhaps it is true." The exponent of the Enlightenment opposed him with all his strength, but his terrible "perhaps," which echoed back at him time after time, broke his resistance. Audrey, what's the point of these 3 parables?
So just kind of backing up a little bit. So this is all coming from chapter 1, and he's trying to describe the nature of doubt and belief. So with that first story, the clown is coming from the burning village, and in reality, the village is burning, and he's trying to tell the neighboring village that. And he compares this to the believer who kind of feels imprisoned and unable to communicate with the non-believer. Like, no matter how urgently you're kind of saying, like, this is all important, this is all, that there's like this shrugging off or like dismissal of the message you're trying to bring. And so there's like a lot of truth and a lot to think about in this story that kind of illustrates the believer, the theologian or the believer communicating to the world. But he kind of says, even though this is representing a lot that's true, is it really so simple as that? Like, do we have a perfectly clear message to an audience that does not have any of the truth, and we're just trying to like convey this clear message? And so he describes like there's a temptation to think, oh, we just need to like change our outfit which there's various ways you can think in the church that people have kind of tried to like change the outfit.
Like just not be a clown. Like if I didn't have the clown makeup on, would they believe me?
Yeah. Or he talks about like, take off your medieval costume, So there's this temptation to kind of like present yourself as totally modern and say the message again. And it's like, no. And so he says, if we're honest, it's actually more complicated than that. Like we don't have a perfectly clear message to, it's not so simple as that. And the reason for that is that everyone has both doubt and belief. So then going to the next story where he describes this man and his brother, and I think this is coming from a play that neither of us have read, but he's describing a man who's kind of, it's just between him and death. He's fastened to a cross and the cross is fastened to nothing except floating on the sea. And he describes this as like the believer is also always confronted with the temptation of atheism. So that's right. That's why the clown doesn't have a perfectly clear message. Is everyone, even those who believe in God, are believing in God while being aware of the abyss between man and God, which is kind of representing by the ocean. So both the believer and the unbeliever, the rabbi story goes into this more. The believer and the unbeliever both experience both doubt and faith. The rabbi story kind of is one of my favorite ones too, where that's kind of presenting like this atheist really wants to argue. And then the rabbi's so caught up in his own prayer, he doesn't even really bother to argue. And he just kind of looks at him quickly like, but what if it's true? And then that's like piercing to the atheist that perhaps the mystery is like what pierces the atheist. And so I love that because I think oftentimes we get this, image of kind of like a smug atheist who like knows everything and has like his self-contained whole. I think he uses the expression like having a self-contained whole, the idea of the world that is all like figured out. And he's kind of presenting that actually every atheist is not anybody that seems like they're kind of a smug atheist is actually a scared atheist. Like they all also experience this like, well, what if I'm wrong? What if, and he says that the unrejectability of the faith becomes clear in the moment that you try to reject it. So
I have often quoted that third story about the atheist talking to the rabbi because I love, and I'm using it differently than Pope Benedict did kind of. I love the line where he says, you've gone to the other teachers and asked them to put God and the kingdom on the table before you. Right. And what I love about that is there's a lot of untrue conversations we get in. Like if you believe in Catholicism, you believe in something quite huge and incredible. Like it's a theory of reality. It's a theory of a divine relationship outside of the seen world. It's it's an incredible proposition that you are actually talking about, right? And it has to do with history. It has to do with you now. It has to do with miracles. It has to do with all these things, right? And if somebody wants to talk to you about that and argue against it, that's not a real conversation because it's like they can take pot shots at different points. And you see this all the time where somebody will critique bad popes. And then as soon as you kind of go, all right, well, let's talk about bad popes. And they're like, actually, I want to talk about why confession doesn't make sense or why women aren't priests or why, they're just like they're just able to shoot at anything in this enormous proposition you've put forward, right? The only real conversation is between someone with a proposition and someone with an alternative. And then we can talk holistically and hopefully charitably about what we're actually, because if it's not this, then what? Nothing, nihilism. If that's your alternative, I don't think you want to have to defend nihilism, but I think that's an issue. And the other thing with the clown that I've thought about is, you don't want to be a clown. And I know that, you're making good points that like sometimes people have cheapened their message by compromising with the world in order not to be the clown and then tried to represent Christ. You don't want to do that, but you also want to be like not the person with the bullhorn at the side of the road telling everyone they're going to hell. That's what comes to mind when I think of the clown, is like somebody who's like, I better go do this or all these people are going to go to hell and they need to know it, much more like we're inviting people attracting people into a curiosity about what this thing is more than we are hitting them with the hammer, you know? And they might get hit with the hammer. I just don't know how to evangelize that way. You know, I think there are probably moments where you could hit people with a hammer as an evangelization tool, but I don't think it's at the side of the road with a bullhorn, you know? I would think it would be at moments of when pretty dark stuff has happened, you know? But
I love this on the second story where he's describing the man kind of attached to the cross and the cross is on the ocean. I love that. There's a lot to think about with that story. And one of the things is I feel like there's a lot of people who want to perfect their faith by refusing to hang out with anyone who's not of the same faith. So it's very fascinating for Pope Benedict to say that your faith is perfected on the ocean of nihilism. It's like, we don't become stronger in our trust in God by refusing to be around people who don't trust God. Like, that's not the way that the trust in God is built. Do you know what I mean?
So can you say that again?
I just feel like we know a lot of people where they want to feel more perfect in their faith by kind of blocking things out. It's kind of a denial of these points that he's making. And he's kind of saying you perfect your faith against doubt.
By encountering doubt as opposed to by running from it?
Perfected against the ocean of nihilism.
Okay.
It's like you can't protect, nourish, perfect any of these things. You can't improve your faith by rejecting the fact that there is doubt. I don't know if that's making much sense, but
I think that is true.
Because when, like, I remember, so he describes like Saint Teresa of Lisieux, you know, she's like, I love how he describes her kind of naive and unproblematical. Because I remember when I first read her story being like, this is so cheesy. But then I read it when I was more ready to read the book later on. But he says, even for someone like as thoroughly immersed in Catholicism as her whole life was, and then you read her writings near the end of her life, and she describes being assailed by temptations of atheism. And so much so that her own order tried to cover up her writings after she died. And in more modern times, I remember that happening with Mother Teresa, where people were kind of like, dark night of the soul. We had no idea Mother Teresa was having a dark night of the soul. So I think it's just, we want to trust God, and we want to increase in our trust in God. And I feel like that I just see people having a strategy of like thinking that they're going to do that by kind of creating a false image as if they've never had any doubt. And I feel like that's not authentic, and so it's not compelling.
Have you ever been tempted by this or seen this in someone else where, you know how it says, like, if you only have a mustard seed of faith, you can move mountains, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen there's kind of an obvious interpretation of this where you'd be like, all right, if I only purely believe, like if I can get rid of all doubt from my mind that this miracle will happen, then somehow I will cause this miracle to happen. They would not say I would cause, they'd say God would do it. But they're kind of saying that by saying, if I can achieve the purity of belief, then I can, basically Jesus says, I will do this miracle. Right?
Yeah.
I've seen people kind of play around with those ideas. Like they try to hype themselves up into like a very, fervent, undoubting belief. And it's kind of weird,
because it sounds a lot like New Age people who are kind of manifesting things.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah. And then but I think what you're kind of saying is almost like if you have the most pure and sequestered Catholic community where you don't let people speak out against the faith, then somehow you will have a more pure faith. Right. And that's also not true.
Yeah. Well, and I think when he's describing, he'll get into these points a lot more later, but he's going to end up describing faith as ultimately relational. So when you're a believer, it's actually that your life is really the words that people kind of listen to. I mean, it is still important to have the actual explanations and to catechize in an intelligent way and to pass on real catechesis and, have questions and answers ready. But ultimately, it's like how the person is living shows that they believe in God. And that's what makes people want to know what they believe.
Right.
So this kind of approach of like argument would be more relevant if the faith was just a list of facts. And the faith, like, I feel like one of the richness of this book is he's describing that the faith is a life of relationship with God. And so it's not just a list of facts that you're trying to kind of pass on. Like, oh, you didn't know how far away the moon is. Let me show you how we figured it out. Let me bring this truth to you with an explanation. You know, like ultimately faith is a relational trust in God. He'll get into this more later, but yeah. So what it means to say, I believe, and everything that follows from that is ultimately an attitude of a trusting relationship with God who we cannot see. So anyway, I think we're jumping ahead, but yeah.
Yeah, we're going to get into the I believe thing. Give me one more shot at this, though. In a different work, Pope Benedict said the new evangelization is teaching people the art of living. And what he meant by that is somehow if you're embodying Christ and the relationship with Christ, that you will be living in a way like in tune with reality and God and love and peace and justice and all these things differently than someone else. And that will be the new evangelization, because people will see that as like, wow, you know, like this person has figured something out, you know, based on this witness, right? As opposed to the argument. You know, and like you said, not that the argument isn't important, but the argument more allows faith and defeats a doubt than the argument actually brings you to faith, you know?
Like apologetics, my understanding of that word is that it has to do with the logos, you know? So when you're giving apologetics, you're giving the logos for something. You're giving the explanation for something. But in scripture, it says, I'm not going to get the scripture, like, do not be afraid to give a reason for your faith. But the first thing, the primary thing is that you have faith, you know? So I think we have some people going around kind of with this very argumentative, aggressive stance, and they don't have anyone asking them about their faith. There has to be, the real life of faith is like a beautiful, compelling thing that makes your life better, that people want to join in on. You know, it's like, I remember one conversion story from a woman that I knew where she saw 3 women across the parking lot and heard them laughing and was just like, that's real laughter. That's real joy. Like, I want to know where they're getting that from. And then she became friends with them, and then she became Catholic. And I think we sometimes want to do rationality first. Like, we want to be like, you should be Catholic because this. And the real witness is a real Catholic life, you know?
There's also a sense in which, like, the best missionary that ever lived, the best person to introduce faith ever to people, the missionary par excellence is Jesus.
Right.
And to the extent your message differs from his is a problem. And he just wasn't, he did a little bit of arguing, but it wasn't his focus, you know? The other thing that bothered me about these parables was, I know that he was simplifying, but to me, it's not really the dichotomy of, are you an atheist or are you Catholic? Do you fully believe or do you believe nothing? You know, to me, I don't get that. I don't feel always tempted by that. The question is like, are you in God's good graces? Is what your understanding of him all a lie? Is your relationship with him real? You know, like, it's not like you just all of a sudden went from I fully believe to atheism. Sometimes it's I fully believe to, like, maybe I've just deluded myself here, you know? And we always are a little bit deluding ourselves on different points. We need to course correct. But I think there's a lot of doubts that are not about full-blown atheism or full-blown Catholicism.
Mm-hmm. Or to also acknowledge that there's times where you're kind of stronger in your faith and weaker in your faith. And it's not necessarily because the content of the faith changed.
Yeah.
You can kind of go through something in your life, someone close to you dies, or you yourself just got diagnosed with a disease, or all the different things, and you can kind of be weak in your faith. And then ideally, those people who you've been kind of walking with, who are in the body of Christ, who are in your parish or your friends, can kind of help strengthen you during those times of trial. But, and you know, it's up to each person's kind of private life, how much of that they share with which friends. But it strikes me as just weird and inauthentic when people are like, I'm a perfect Catholic. There's this like signaling of faith, which oftentimes I feel like sometimes it's covering over like a lack of faith. I don't know. Anyway, being jaded, maybe.
Being jaded.
I jumped to a different point, but yeah.
Yeah. When I am most self-assured, if I'm not walking the road to Calvary, like sometimes I'm self-assured and I like hate that I know this thing because I'm like, oh, I have to do this thing that I know to be right and I don't want to do it. Then I know that I'm kind of I'm being with Christ, right? When I'm really self-assured and I'm very proud of my faith and I'm not having any doubts, is a time when I actually think my ego is probably, my relationship with Christ is actually suffering at that moment, and it's often when someone dies or you're in a bad place. It's really the lame Jesus poster when there's two sets of footprints in the sand and then there's one. And he said, Jesus, why did you, leave me? And Jesus, I was carrying you then. That's real. You know what I mean? Like, I'm promoting the lame Jesus poster right now, right? Like, sometimes when you're most struggling and your heart is most crushed and you feel most unworthy, you are doing fine in your faith life, I mean, that's literally what the Bible is prescribing. He wants our hearts to be crushed, to be tender, to be repentant, and to be loving. Mm-hmm. All right.
Well, I also think, having grown up surrounded by so much atheism, I love how he's describing this interplay as just a real and very human thing, that there's moments where it's like it's either all or nothing, Before we go on to the next section on belief, I wanted to go back a little bit to some philosophical points about doubt.
Go confidently. Okay. Without doubt. Do it.
Okay. So he says so after these three parables, he's describing that the believer has faith against doubt. The believer can perfect his fate only on the ocean of nihilism, temptation, and doubt. And that also the unbeliever is not exactly a mere man without faith. So the believer he's describing has faith against doubt, whereas the atheist has faith through doubt and in the form of doubt. And this has a lot to do with like the whole thought of modern man. So I just wanted to describe a little bit of Descartes in modern philosophy. So in Descartes' writings, he describes that you can only, he wanted to only know what was the most true. So he sets out on this like intellectual project to know what could be known most surely. And so he decides, I think he describes it as pouring an acid of doubt over everything. So just thinking of this in relation to the belief in doubt. So he pours an acid of doubt over everything. And then the thing that he cannot doubt is that he's still thinking. So he says, I think, therefore I am. And then the second truth that he concludes is, I am a thinking thing. And then he kind of works up from there. So this maybe doesn't seem like it connects. So this has a lot of influence over all of modern philosophy. Man's kind of obsession with his own reason, his own powers of his own reason. But when you look at Descartes, especially in the context of what Pope Benedict is saying, Descartes never gives a reason why doubt would be the primary mode of knowledge. But his entire thought is based on that. The most sure thing is what I cannot doubt. And so for him, he's literally building his whole life on doubt. And that has ushered in a big wave of, where we are now with atheism. So when he says that the atheist has faith through doubt, that's kind of where Descartes is starting out. Descartes doesn't say, oh, doubt makes more sense than faith, so that's why I'm doing this. He just starts off with doubt. And so his whole structure of reality is based in himself because of doubt.
I often thought that I have no disagreement with what you said because I'm still trying to kind of grok it. But I have faith through doubt, or the atheist has faith through doubt. To me, what that means is that Jesus is still knocking on the door of every atheist. And even if they're not admitting it, they're still getting that knock, right? And the other thing is any untrue belief puts you at an inconsistency with reality, which always has a negative consequence.
Wait, say that again.
Any untrue belief you have puts you inconsistent with reality, which always has a negative, natural consequence, right? So atheism just doesn't lead to happiness. Just true. Atheism creates more problems than it solves. Like maybe it solves this problem that you don't want to go to church on Sunday, but it's going to create a lot more. And I kind of think that that's where a lot of evangelization should take place, is in that the problems that like if a person is caught in the act of adultery, say, they will give a very long justification. Alcoholics will give very creative justifications on why they need to be drinking, right? But the truth is, it's destroying their life. And they almost have to admit that. Like you just say, all right, well, how did that work out? Well, did that make you happy? You feel better now, and by kind of showing how their ideas actually aren't working well for them, you're kind of like helping Jesus knock on their door. And you're also like kind of creating you're also like showing that they actually they're promoting something other than Christ. Now you have two things to compare. I don't know. That's kind of a deep subject on how to be an evangelist that I don't know that Pope Benedict's, that is the point of this book, I guess. So, all right. Modern man assumes that the idea of I believe is central to every religion, that it's like a set of beliefs that are unprovable that someone just adopts, right? And the first thing that Pope Benedict, when he starts kind of thinking about the words I believe, says is this is just not true. Like, if you look at Old Testament Judaism, they kept calling their faith the law. They thought of it mostly as a law, not as a I believe faith, right? The other thing is, like, if you look at the old Roman religions, it didn't matter if you actually believed Zeus was real or that all the stories were real. That wasn't like the issue. Faith wasn't the issue. The issue was the ritual, the social cohesion. Did you participate? I've heard like in Japan that there's like this religious sentiment where no one's really worshiping the catfish god anymore. But if the catfish god's temple gets destroyed in a, tsunami or something, they very dutifully rebuild it because they're religious. This is just kind of interesting that this is like, religion doesn't all mean I believe, right? And then he kind of goes into what's different about a religion that stakes itself on belief. Do you want to go for that, or do you want me to keep going?
Well, yeah. So he's describing like we assume. I think he used the phrase the center of gravity. We assume that the center of gravity of other religions is belief, but even they themselves are not calling it that. So the law, like for Jews, and then he uses the word religio, which is like the ritual, the Roman religio, like that you would be following a ready-made mode of life as a group, and the center of it was not this little word credo. Right.
And with the credo, what's interesting about that is it's a set of knowable things by faith, meaning by revelation, by the philosophical tool set, or by whatever. It's a set of knowable things beyond the seen world that, in fact, are where you need to center your being. And that's kind of the incredible claim of the creed, is like, not only do I believe these things that are beyond the seen world, that they are, in fact, the most real, and it is where my very being needs to be centered and reside. And I think that quickly gets into the idea of it's also not just like a code or a law. It's it's a relationship. Like the scandal of Jesus in the New Testament is him saying that God is Abba, Father. God's far more loving than anyone's supposed.
He makes this, what I thought was a slightly surprising point, where he says, we have this temptation to think that in the past everybody was a believer, and that he thinks with historical research that we find out that there has always been a large mass of nominal believers.
I found that distressing when he said that. So he was talking about the Middle Ages, and we think of like everyone was Catholic, right? And his take was only a fraction of the society deeply took the creed seriously. And then a whole lot of people were Catholic in the sense of ritual observance, all these other things,
I think there's something sad about that idea, to kind of think that it's always been a small minority who actually believe. But I don't know, I find it a little bit edifying too, because you see people kind of move in groups without thinking that much. So I think like a lot of people my age who have fallen away from the church, and Sundays are about like, yoga, Starbucks, kind of self-care and stuff. And there's just like this mass movement trend influencer kind of culture. And he's describing that sort of that people have always moved in groups, and that he describes it as the inner movement of belief, like the leap between the infinite gulf of God and man, and the inner life of faith has actually always been rare.
Yeah. And the thing that kind of bothers me about this is I would rather it be a Catholic culture than a yoga culture.
Right.
Even if it's not deep, and these sacraments are real, even when someone's not full blown, like deeply internalizing the creed and the relationship. I don't know. I kind of I don't know what exactly to do with it, but it's interesting he said it.
So he's going to keep on going about what it means to say, I believe, but the provisional definition of belief is that the world of seeing, hearing, and touching, the things that man can kind of take in with his own senses, is not the totality of the world. So when you say, I believe, you have an attitude towards reality, that there is something beyond what you can see and touch and feel that is actually more real, and that the things that we can perceive through our senses are dependent on this more real thing. So that's like a provisional definition of I believe.
I'm also going to say something that I'm going to say this more directly than he says it in the text. When you say to have faith, the most popular way of understanding that is, oh, you believe God exists, right? And that's actually not, I think, the right definition of faith. It means I trust God. I mean, I have faith in my mother if I trust my mother, that I believe she'll be there. If you tell me something about her, I'll be like, that doesn't sound like her. That's not the mother I know, This trust in God, this faith in God is actually based on the relationship, not based on just some idea he exists, All right. Shall we go to the family mission experience? All right. I would like to start to say that if you go back and listen to our podcast where I think Maggie comes on and talks about the family mission experience and the opportunity there is to go to Belize and serve with the SALT order in Belize. I kind of don't believe in short-term missions. And all I say that is I believe that a lot of people need to go on them. I just mean that it's kind of for the person going on it more than it is to radically change the nation you're visiting. Long-term missions can do big works. Short-term is almost more for the person going. And that's why I really think it was kind of genius that they named it the family mission experience, because you're getting to experience missions and you're getting a taste of it. And you're given an opportunity that maybe your kid might one day want to do missions, or you might want to do missions. We met a family there who did, leave everything, a successful business in the U.S., and go do missions, So how about we just tell people exactly what it was, what we did.
So we flew to Belize and we spent a week in Belize City participating in the mission there, which was primarily working through the various ministries that the priest at that parish already has going. So the very first morning I was able to visit a hospital because Father Scott visits a hospital. So that was pretty awesome for me to go and see. And then we were also able to go to a mass in a nursing home because Father Scott says mass in the nursing home. And we participated a lot in helping out with the Montessori school there right next to the parish and just the daily life of the parish, going to mass and everything. And then we had, we helped to kind of get set up and run a fundraising night for that school, the Montessori school there. And then there was also kind of more physical projects throughout the day, building a chicken coop for the school, building a grotto for Our Lady. So I loved that they had kind of thought through what can we do for kids of all these different ages. Our kids had a blast. And I think ahead of time, it was kind of why are we going on a mission with all our kids? Because we're kind of overwhelmed even regular life. But they did kind of have a beautiful setup to allow people to participate in the work to the extent of your capability throughout the day.
And so we went as a family, but we also went with a bunch of friends in Kansas City, from our kids' school, the Montessori school they go to, that's run by SALT. And that's how it seems like this thing's set up. So if you're coming out of Washington, D.C., you might bring people from your parish. It might be 15 years ago, with families, right? The other thing was I thought a lot of the stuff that I got to do, getting to go to a government-run nursing home in the developing world and talk to the people who live there, and they speak English, which was cool. I didn't the way that Belize is an English speaking country and the way that it's a Caribbean country, even though it's on the mainland or whatever you want to say, was pretty striking. So getting to see this developing nation's nursing home, talk to the people in English, be able to communicate well. I did some homeless ministry one night, getting to see, I've done homeless ministry in the States. It was kind of different there, compare and contrast. There's just a lot of learning that's happening. And the SALT mission that you're most directly attached to is a parish. The current priest is Father Scott. And with this parish, they have Guadalupe Media next door, which is like a TV and radio station founded by Solt, broadcasting all across Belize. And then next to that is a little Montessori school that Solt runs. And then down the road is a pregnant women's shelter. Was that run by Solt or was that run by somebody else?
That was
run by Solt also. So you're getting like to touch all these different like things that's going on. And you're staying kind of across the highway in this like fourplex that has very limited air conditioning and it's very hot. And you should know that before you go. It will be uncomfortable, but you will drink Coke from glass bottles, and it will be the most delicious thing ever. And so every night, so morning breakfast mostly was supposed to be on your own, but one of the people who hosted were exceptional.
Yeah.
You know, there was a deacon from the States with his family who'd founded the Guadalupe Media Group. He also had been a, entrepreneur here in the U.S. with a successful company. There was another guy who'd been an engineer here in the U.S. who was like cooking pancakes for the kids. There was another family that lived in a border town that were full-time Solt missionaries who came in, border town with Guatemala, where they're doing things like running a Catholic community college that's focused on the liberal arts and classical education. And it's a community college. Just like interesting, So they came in, they brought their kids to played with our kids, and our kids had a few friends from school they were playing with, and it was just pretty fantastic, And all the people related to Solt were exceptional. I was like kind of blown away. Very humble people and also just very talented people.
We've talked about it. Our family has been like very blessed by Solt so much that I think it's actually hard to describe. So I do want to try to describe at least a little bit. The order has like a beautiful sense of personalism. So I feel like even with the school, like there's sometimes a mentality of like, I pay for this, I drop my kids off, I expect this, like it's all transactional. And that's just not how the school functions. It's very much like the mutual gift of everyone involved. And so there's like new things that get tried and there's this beauty of receiving people who are willing to kind of work for the Lord and allowing their talents to come out, So I think one of my favorite moments of the week was Father Scott's birthday celebration, because we had already been witnessing kind of like his energy in all these different ministries. Some of them were going well because of other people's work along with him. Some of them had kind of been started and then kind of fizzled, like a big variety of works. And then being able to be at his birthday celebration and seeing the people who surround him just rejoice in him and like be happy to celebrate. And there was a man who brought his drum and like just had a huge smile on his face and like wanted to play his drum, and his daughters were dancing. And it just really reminded me of John Paul II, this feeling of like Catholicism for the whole world. There's something really about the personalism of Solt that I have never seen in another order. And it is a blessing.
There's an idea in all religious orders that you're supposed to be kind of like dead to the world. Like you kind of leave your family and you join this religious order, right? I feel like with Solt, this kind of forgetfulness of self is done really well. Like everyone I've met, even the laity, just seem to be like, we joined. It's not about our ego. It's just, they're having fun. They're pouring themselves out. It looks like, I've seen them go through trials and they do it well, but what was funny was they do almost no recruiting. So Solt is laity who are kind of like members. You can join. You're supposed to join. If you're married, you join with your spouse. Then there's like the sisters, then there's the priests. And then although they each govern themselves, their mission bases are supposed to be a cooperation between the three. We see it at our kids' school, and we also saw that a lot, very well in Belize, and like when I went up to the lay members in Belize, because I've always wondered why they never ask us to join.
Well, that's part of what I love. There's this just great honoring of human freedom.
It's kind of at my parish. There's a lot of young families that have joined, and I go, I think the nights here are kind of interesting. And they go, this is the first parish I've ever been at that the knights have not tried to recruit me. And therefore I'm a little interested. That's what Solt feels like a little bit. But anyway, so when I meet these Solt people, a lot of them were working with Solt for a decade. before joining. And one guy, 20 years. I was talking to this guy who literally was married by one of the founders of SOLT. He'd, been working with SOLT. Now that he's a widower, he's full time, just like going from SOLT mission to SOLT mission, running projects, hosting us, doing all this work. And I go, why after 20 years did you finally decide to join? And he looked at me and was like, that's a good question. He goes, Clark, why join anything? And then walks up this guy who'd been working for SOLT for 10 years and was just starting to join. I go, I want to know why after 10 years of being like SOLT adjacent, did you decide to join? And he looks at me and he goes, that's a good question, Clark. Why join anything? And I thought, these are terrible answers, but it was very beautiful. Like I know that they're there for the right reasons. It's just like, it's hard to articulate what's going on. It's just kind of fun.
I think that there's this expression being in the world and not of the world. And part of the reason why so many other religious orders, especially for nuns, do not allow there's like oftentimes a lot more rules for nuns on how much they kind of participate in the world. Like even during their novitiate, they'll be like when they're allowed family visits or how many letters they're allowed to receive, or, sometimes all of those things are like quite highly regulated. So it's very striking that the sisters that we know have become such important friends. Like that was part of our motivation to go, is like some of these sisters are some of the most important people for me that I love to talk to the most, So somehow they have developed this charism that allows their sisters to be in the world. But part of trying to protect against becoming of the world is really, it's a spiritual thing. And I mean, we see this in ourselves and in other people working in ministry. You can develop your own ego problem based on the work that you do. And SOLT has this beautiful ability to, like what Father Adam used to describe, like clean out your desk in 5 minutes. Like you can do an important work and people either know it's important or they don't. And then you can switch to a very humble task. I know like in the Sisters of Life, I know that you can be like sidekick to the bishop for a while, and then you can get switched to a new assignment where you're cleaning toilets. Like it's all about protecting you from developing an ego based on your charitable work, because that can really crush your ability to do charitable work. And so I think SOLT somehow has this kind of in their charism, like there's a real genuine humility. It's not like virtue signaling humility. There's like actual real humility and real work getting done. And it's not getting done by perfect people. It's getting done by people willing to do work, So you kind of allow yourself to enter into the body of Christ in kind of a richer way. And it's not because you're not being called because you have the perfect talent set and you had the perfect training and you got recruited. It's just this freedom.
I, I've sat multiple sisters down at my kids' school and been like, do you realize how important this is? This is so great what you guys are doing here. And they never agree with me and they just kind of look at me. And it's also like, and next year or next month, I might be teaching RCIA in a border town in Belize. It's just, they have this like way they're giving themselves fully to the task while being detached. Which is the Father Adam idea of like always be ready to clean out your desk in 5 minutes,
right?
And that's cool. It's beautiful. Thank you, SOLT. Thank you for Sister Loudon for organizing it. And that was the SOLT Family Mission Experience. So if you've got a group who wants to go, check out their website. It's very affordable. The challenge is actually just the plane tickets. It's not the cost of the mission trip. So, all right. Peace be with you, and like, subscribe, and listen to the Simpleton Podcast.